Okay, well, we might kick off. It looks like we've got quite a few participants on, so if everybody's comfortable, we will get started. Welcome everyone to Cattle Australia's Land Management and Biodiversity webinar this afternoon, Redefining Deforestation in Australia. We're fortunate today to have a wide stakeholder group from producers nationally. We've got large ag companies, state farming organisations, government departments and other supporting businesses, and I think we've had well over 200 registrations. So it goes to show that there's a lot of interest in this topic, which is great. So today is an opportunity. We hope that you get to understand the commitments that have happened through the Rockhampton Roundtable and the agreement that Roundtable that we had in November. The why, the how, and the who, and most importantly, seek your engagement to guide the process forward. A little bit of housekeeping: this webinar is being recorded for the benefit of those that cannot make it today. I should probably introduce myself for those of you who don't know me. My name is Adam Coffey and I'm a Central Queensland beef cattle producer. I'm also a director on the board of Cattle Australia. Just briefly to run through the agenda for today, I'll give a little bit of background context to kick things off, and then I'm going to hand over to Chris Parker, who is Cattle Australia's CEO, to talk about why this is important. He's also going to introduce the advisory board and their reason for being involved in this work, and then we'll enter into the guts of today's webinar, which is going to be some Q&A for 15 minutes or more if time is needed. We do hope to wrap up in an hour, but we can probably stretch a little bit if we get into some good conversations. After the Q&A, Ange Hutchinson, who has been appointed as the Executive Officer of the Advisory Board, is going to talk about next steps. And then I'll hand to David Allen, who's the Chair of Cattle Australia's Sustainable Resilient Beef Systems Working Group. And then we'll wrap up. If we can kick into the next slide, please, Morgan. Thank you. So I guess to set a little bit of context here, and I want to talk about the roundtable event that we held in Rockhampton last November. But I suppose to take a step back from that and prior to that event, many of you would be aware, I suppose, of a level of frustration that's been around for some time now within industry and supply chain around land management, around deforestation, around vegetation management. And I guess if we think about that, particularly in recent times, in light of impending EU and other international definitions around forest, that's not necessarily relevant to Australia when we talk about canopy cover or vegetation height, etc. We recognise that we have, as producers, that we have a unique environment in Australia, and I guess also in the context of having some of the strongest vegetation management regulations in the world. So ultimately, we recognise the need for strong, robust, measurable definitions around vegetation management in an Australian context to provide supply chain assurance. And I think, if I reflect on, I guess, previous advocacy that we've undertaken in the space of, deforestation and vegetation management, that would include, I guess, hosting people on our own property here. We had a Central Queensland supply chain tour that we did a couple of years back, and it's always interesting when you bring people together from, I guess, all sides of the supply chain, and then government and regulators, etc. And some of whom who sometimes have, I guess, alternate views or come from a differing point of view or context around land management, food, agricultural production. When we take them on site and we show them what we do and why we do that, and we explain the context through which we produce food, and that good outcomes for productivity and profitability can also go hand in hand with good environmental outcomes and improvements in ecology, then they can walk away feeling fairly satisfied that we're all trying to achieve pretty similar outcomes. But to get that into a format that is digestible and measurable for everybody is hard, because what we do and how we manage our agricultural businesses is complex. So I guess that sets the scene for what happened in November in Rockhampton, which was the roundtable event. it kicked off with a property tour for those who were able to make it. We went to David and Elizabeth Hill's property, a couple of hours out of Rockhampton, and David and Elizabeth are very good, I suppose, at showing, displaying. They're in the Brigalow Belt, and they've got some very good examples, I suppose, of vegetation management and land management over the years that they're quite open and honest about what has worked, what hasn't worked, what they're trying to achieve now in terms of production and hand in hand with the environment, and then what they hope to achieve in the future. So that sort of set the scene for the representatives that were able to make it. We had some 50 people in the room. These were right across supply chain. We had, Minister Furner from the Queensland Department of Ag. Baringa Partners were there, who are international climate risk experts, and really important to have that point of view in the room. And then other supply chain partners with Coles, McDonald's, Rabo, Tees, etc. A big part of the day and a half, or best part of 2 days we had there, were producer presentations. And they set, I guess it was all around, again, what we do and why. And a big thanks to the producers that were able to come and present there and really, really set the context for the whole of supply chain that was in the room around, how we're focusing on improving ecological health of their land, hand in hand with improvements in productivity and profitability. We shouldn't underestimate the significance of being able to get these people together in one room. And I suppose when we think about our supply chain and we think about our regulators, and we extend it to NGOs, etc., all who have a vested interest in land management, there's an element of trust, a very big element of trust that has to enter into the process. And we think about the fact that a lot of these people in the room are ultimately competitors. There's obviously IP considerations, and how we manage that confidentially and ensure that everybody is there to have honest conversations, but then also to build trust within the group so that we can actually achieve what we want to achieve. So that, I hope that sort of sets a little bit of context here. That is the background to the roundtable event that occurred in Rocky, out of which came a set of commitments, which I will talk about shortly. But again, we want to make sure that today is informative, but it also gives those online to the opportunity to provide feedback, ask questions, and legitimately steer this process forward, because it is your process. It's our process, so we need to make sure we take it where we want it to go. If we can skip to the next slide, please, Morgan. So I'll just talk briefly about the commitments that were made out of Rockhampton, and then I'll talk about the challenges and then hand over to Chris. So as you can see there on the screen, commitment one, I guess, which is the big bold one, is to develop a national industry definition on deforestation in the Australian context. And this is to be used in supply chain and financial institutions. There's been extensive environmental research undertaken across Australia's diverse bioregions, resulting in Australian government-funded national resource management reporting system. So our vision is to use this information to develop a reporting framework that protects and enhances our uniquely Australian environment and grow efficient and resilient beef businesses and thriving rural communities. Next slide, please, Morgan. So commitment two, to develop an ongoing communications and media campaign to tell a positive story about the benefits of sustainable land management in the Australian beef industry. And that's going to be, a little ways down the track here, since sort of kicking off this roundtable. Chris is going to talk further about the advisory board that's been set up, so we can chunk that one out a bit more. Next slide, thanks, Morgan. And just thirdly, another commitment from the roundtable was to develop a minimum sustainability standard on environmental stewardship. And I should point out that this is not an action per se of the advisory board. This will be a process that's going to be led by Cattle Australia and Alpha, who are at the roundtable, and other peak bodies, including Supply Chain Task Force and ISC, to in the hope that we can ultimately develop sustainability standard modules that we can utilise within our supply chain moving forward. But again, that's a way down the track yet. Next slide, please, Morgan. So I'll just wanted to touch on some of the challenges before I hand over to Chris. And as you can see up on the screen, that the cost of compliance has been a big one. And I guess that's nobody really knows what the cost of compliance around sort of deforestation regulations is or is going to be, and that's been seen recently, I guess, with the impending EU deforestation regulations and the resulting confusion around compliance. Another challenge is the urgency. And, we've seen a plethora of sort of individual goals and targets set on a national and international level within supply chain partners, government, and certainly sort of, global pressure stemming from ESG type commitments within and outside of our supply chain. So there is a real urgency behind this. And, once again, advocacy in our industry, we haven't been historically very good at. But I like to think that, this is a good instance where we can get together and really drive some important outcomes here and get ahead of this conversation. Data that supports the industry, and I might, Ange Hutchinson might talk a little bit more about that and others, and it's certainly something, if you have questions around it, we can discuss, but it's, obviously there are a lot of questions around data, where it sits and who controls it. The ability to challenge misinformation is a big one, and as a lot of people on this call would be aware, is that we get referred to often as a deforestation hotspot. And as I've mentioned earlier, in the context of some of the strongest veg management regulations in the world, how do we combat misinformation in a streamlined and cohesive manner? Different states, different needs, different legislation. Part of this process, I guess, is a greater sort of audit and greater understanding of the state and territory regulations and how we can roll this into international industry definitions. And then finally, acknowledgement of the Australian geographical land management and production systems at an international level. And this is a really important point, probably for me to finish up on, is, again, just reinforcing the fact that Australia, we are a different environment on a global sort of level. And so, again, this is about seeking acknowledgement that we're different and that applying international definitions and regulations will potentially have pretty diverse outcomes for industry and the environment. So that's probably it from me to kick this off. Morgan, if we can move on to the next slide, and then Chris, I will hand over to you to talk about why this is important, why now, and also talk about the advisory board structure and introduce its members. Thanks, Chris.
Great, thanks very much, Adam. Really appreciate that introduction. Hi, folks. To those who don't know me, Chris Parker, CEO of Cattle Australia, and I think it's a nice segue coming off the challenges that that Adam went through. If we're really looking at why, well, I think the challenges provide us with a pretty good guide as to why. But fundamentally, Cattle Australia looked at this. We thought that there's clearly a range of pressures that are coming across a multitude of issues in this space. And off the back of the Rockhampton meeting, decided that taking a lead in this, at least this deforestation space across the supply chain, was an extremely useful place to start. And I suppose when I look at this, and I'm a big producer as well, not as big as obviously a lot of you guys, but when I look at this, what I see is that we need to engage now, and we need to engage fully, or people are going to start doing things to us without our input. And that's the real challenge for us, I think, and the real key for us, and why we should be involved. So you can see there that there's a slightly complex diagram, and my apologies for the slightly complex diagram, but essentially what we're looking there is the manner in which these frameworks and the manner in which what's coming at us from the government and internationally, we're going to need to manage, and we're going to need to make sure that that isn't happening to us, and that we're able to adapt and provide guidance for the manner in which these are done in the Australian environment. Now, that said, and Morgan, if you'd go to the next slide, the way we've gone about this is to try and start with these sorts of webinars across a wide range of activities that we're engaged with, and including setting up an advisory board, which has been set up to guide this work. Most of the work will be done by staff within Cattle Australia, but to guide this work and work ourselves through into a position where we're at least able to go out and start to define what this issue looks like and what we might be able to do about it. Now, Cattle Australia are chairing it. There's a number of participants you can see there on the screen, and a number of whom are with us today. I saw Harvey join. I saw Mary. There's a few others there, and I'd really open up to the members of the advisory board now about why they're engaged in this project. As I said, we've tried to get a full coverage across the supply chain. We feel that there is opportunities there for us to be able to set in place some guidance for how we're going to do it, and also to put in place something that isn't being imposed on us. And that's the real key for me, and what's driving Cattle Australia's participation in this. So we might, I might just open it up to those who have come in off the advisory board, and would welcome any comments from some of you about why you see this as important, and why you've put yourselves forward to be part of the advisory board. Thank you, Adam.
Thanks, Chris. And do we want to, those members of the advisory board that are on, do you want to unmute yourself and provide a bit of comment, or would you like me to see who have we got? Harvey, are you on board?
We've got Lachlan there and Harvey. I think Lachlan came on first.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. So, from a Rabobank perspective, we want to continue to support our clients to deal with these definitions, and also to make sure that from a market perspective, so the commodities they're producing, they have full access to the markets. And so we see being involved in this work with Cattle Australia is absolutely critical in supporting the industry, to make sure that, one, we're fully abreast of what is happening across the supply chain, and that we also contribute from what we see from either a central bank or a regulatory perspective relative to financial services. So that's why we're involved. Really looking forward to it. We have similar high risk exposures in Brazil and Argentina, where similar sort of work is being taken place. So it's really important that the definitions that are being derived by the international institutions are very well understood by producers, and that there are industry bodies working so that they're explained in terms of the local environments that are working, in terms of, okay, what fits, what doesn't fit, how can we work within this, or where can't we, and what are the reasons why, and what are the environmental impacts. So yeah, great that everybody's joined. It's a really good turnout, and thanks Chris and the Cattle Australia board for setting this up.
Thank you, Lachlan. Harvey, are you on?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Lachlan. I think if I look at this issue, why have I agreed to be involved? It's because I think some of these sort of issues come from aspirations and commitments that are made about practices, in this case land management, for lots of good reasons. But at the end of the day, it's producers, it's Australian graziers in this instance, that actually have to manage to deliver on the commitment, or work within a commitment, and we're the ones that actually know what's possible and what's practicable. So I think it's really important that we're at the table, so that any definition here that our supply chain gets to use, that hopefully we then benefit from, is within the realms of what's sensible within our landscapes. And I think if we come up with a good agreed practical definition throughout our supply chain, experience would show that over time, that the markets will work out what is practical and what is a practice in a supply chain that can meet their requirements, both for environmental management, but the safe and reliable and affordable food that they need.
Thanks, Harvey. Do we have anybody else from the advisory board on the call? Maria, Tom, or Christian, are you on board?
Yeah, Adam, Christian Moulders. Can you hear me there?
G'day, Christian. Gotcha.
Great, Adam. Thank you. And thanks to Cattle Australia. It's been a great initiative, I think, a great leadership position to pull this together and I guess get control of what's before us. And just to reiterate all the the issues that have been raised here today. I think for me, the biggest thing is around simplicity and making it very easy for producers to demonstrate the great work that they do. And that's going to be the challenge before us. So those costs associated with reporting or demonstrating, if there's multiple definitions and multiple systems, we want to steer away from that and take control of it. So great initiative. Thank you.
Thanks, Christian. Thanks for that input. Well, I'm not sure if we have any other advisory board members on here. Jess Laughlin, you're on.
Yes, sorry, it took me a second to unmute. Yes, so I'm on in Tom's absence representing AMIC and sort of processor involvement. Really important, I think, just echoing the thoughts that have already been said, that we're all working together in this space, not only to meet requirements of markets, our regulatory reporting requirements and policy, but also doing that in a way that's really practical at the farm level as well, and that, you know, isn't inefficient or you know, blows out the cost to collect the information that we need and feed that through to the relevant stakeholders. So yeah, in that, to ensure that in the middle there, we can, you know, collect the data that we require and get it into the hands of the people who need it in an effective way.
Good one. Thank you, Jess. And thanks, everyone. I think that gives a bit more, a little bit more explanation and context as to who's at the table and why. And again, I think just for me to reiterate, you know, the trust that this group has and will build for these representatives, I guess, to be able to report back to their respective supply chain partners to ensure that we're all across what's happening in this process. So we might move on, and we've got a fair chunk of time here in the middle for some Q&A. So I encourage you, and I think Caitlin put a message in the chat there, just to use the Q&A function down the bottom rather than the chat function if you want to write something, or if you have a question that you'd like to ask now, just stick your hand up and we can, I think we have to unmute you. Is that correct, Morgan? But if you want to ask a question, just stick your hand up now, please.
Adam, there is a question in the chat.
Yeah. Oh, people don't listen. Who's asked the question? Oscar. All right. Well, Oscar's at first in best dress, so we'll even though he didn't put him in the right spot, we might fire off there. So, and I see there's a hand raised there. Oh no, Oscar, that's you with your hand raised. Oscar, do you want to ask a question?
Sorry, boss. Yes, just thanks for the outline, and it's an interesting process, and it's certainly it's a big challenge. There were two questions. The second question was, obviously this is a long-standing issue. We've got, in some cases, 3 decades of regulatory definitions at various state and even federal jurisdictions which don't match up to, say, the EU or the FAO definitions, which would be more in line with what industry is going to need. How's the interplay there planned for this process? The second one is it a specific target of this process to try and match up directly to some of the standards? You talked about them, but are we talking the financial and biodiversity disclosures or the emissions disclosures or other IFRS? Because I guess it is quite a complicated and technical process to get a domestic system to correlate to those international frameworks. You've got the right people in the room to do it, but I just wondered, is that a specific outcome of what you're trying to do?
Thanks, Oscar. And a couple of good questions there. And full disclosure, whilst I'm chairing this webinar, I think there are people on here that are far better equipped to answer these sort of questions than me. So I would like to throw that out to, you know, Chris, Caitlin, Ange. We've got Eva Bissling, who's our Director of Policy and Advocacy Online too, or any of the advisory board members. Who wants to dive in there and address Oscar's questions?
So I think, Adam, if I may, I might just ask Ange to just work her way through a couple of those, because I think we should be able to provide a very quick outline that addresses exactly those issues, which will probably answer some other broader questions as well. So, Ange, would you mind just stepping in, please?
No problems. Thanks so much for your question, Oscar, and I think it really outlines the level of complexity that we're dealing with. To put it really eloquently, is really defining deforestation and what a forest is and isn't. To the starting point, it has to be internationally aligned, it has to be credible and science backed. It needs the support of our regulatory system in Australia. So with those broad ranging, we also need to make it simple and robust for all of our state and territories to be able to work with as well. So beauty is in the simplicity, but it's also making the complex simple. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Ange. We'll keep going unless anybody's got anything to add to that. I see a question here from Nick Savage that's asking how will the advisory board communicate with everybody? Can there be a community of practice website of all relevant considerations and deliberations? Ange, do you want to dive into that one again, or anybody else?
Yeah, certainly can. So thanks. We have put up on the Cattle Australia website under land management a number of tools and resources, including where you can do an expression of interest and put your name down so that we can communicate directly with you on updates and further webinars to come. I don't want to, I'll skip to the next part on considering in scoping considerations as well. So there's an opportunity for everyone to have input and feedback along the process as well, which is really important to us because of that complexity I mentioned before.
Thanks, Ange. And perhaps if this is going to sort of flow into your next section or next steps that David's going to talk about, you know, we might be better off to sort of plough on and actually do those presentations, which may answer some of these questions, but we'll see how we go. There are a couple more questions in the chat. I see some hands up as well, so I might go to them first. Tom.
G'day, Tom Stockwell, Sunday Creek. I'm just,
Tom.
G'day. In the territory, a question. This conversation is sounding very much like the ones we had when we were setting up the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework. And from my worm's eye view up here, that hasn't done a great job for deforestation type stuff in the north. I'm just stage during this presentation, maybe someone could clarify for us where this sits with all the stuff that's come out of that over the past 10 years or whatever, and just let us know how it all fits together, because it seems to me there was a lot of effort go in there, and we've still got it. Now we're setting up a new body to do essentially part of that job again, at least. Over.
Thanks, Tom. And I might just start that one off. I think, you know, the North and you guys in the North and the ongoing conversation, I suppose, around developing the North is certainly a critical part of this process, and one that was raised time and time again at the Rocky Roundtable, where Will Evans was certainly attending there and representing NTCA and the Northern Producers. So that's yeah, that's something that's certainly part of this process. And then I think in terms of ownership of this, you're right, we do have the ABSF, and there's an ongoing conversation around goals and targets within the ABSF, as well as you know, how that all sits with greater industry initiatives. But I think there's a real genuine desire for this process to be owned and run by industry. Is there a risk of duplication? Perhaps, and that's something we need to consider going forward. But Ange or Chris or anybody else, do you want to add anything to Tom's question?
Yeah, great question, Tom. And by the great work that's done in the ABSF, this is no means of taking away from that, but it's the opportunity to double down on this particular issue with the resourcing and capacity to do so on something that is not just that takes away the importance of ABSF, but this is dealing with something that needs to be internationally absorbed. So that's why we're taking a singular focus on this perspective.
Thanks, Ange. Gus Atkinson.
G'day, Angus Atkinson, Coonabarabran, New South Wales, Centre of the Universe. My question, I suppose, is along the same line as Tom's, just with the linkage with the Beef Sustainability Framework and the Australian Ag Sustainability Framework. You know, we all, you mentioned that we don't want to do any, well, you might say doing things, having your own systems and that sort of stuff, but we seem to be almost reinventing the wheel. And I'm just unsure of the linkage there and how it's going to fit. And I suppose from a mixed farmer as well, I just wonder how people like me will get on with this stuff. It really seems really focused purely on cattle. And if you're a big cattle operation, it suits. But if you're mixed like we are down here, I'm just wondering how that's going to work in. And again, I suppose my main comment would be, just worried about the replication and doing stuff that's already been done and not working with the existing structures. And I'd really like to get an idea of how you're going to get that done. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Angus. And I think to reiterate what Ange said is probably just singling out this, land management deforestation issue as being one that we really need to act on. And perhaps we've been kind of treading water with some very good initiatives and very good frameworks that are focusing on environmental sustainability as a whole. So I think that is perhaps the difference here. But how we dovetail it into what we already have, and then you make a really good point about cross commodity. How this issue affects mixed farming operations and different agricultural production systems, and that's something we're very conscious of. I did have that conversation with Harvey Gaynor there yesterday. Harvey, did you want to expand any more on Angus's question around that cross commodity piece?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Adam. It's a really good question and one I'm mindful of, and certainly will be keeping in mind at the in the advisory board. I think this issue, this first issue about defining a definition of deforestation is quite narrow. But we should be, when we're trying to work on it, we need to be looking at things like Australian Beef Sustainability Framework, the Ag Sustainability Framework, and other industry assurance schemes and sustainability standards. And we run we take the risk in doing this that we might try and lead out with a definition, but we may have to sort of temper it with what's around the rest of our Australian ag industries, because I know that our customers overseas can't, they won't be able to tolerate, a beef definition and a cotton definition and a grains definition. So I think, we just need to have our eyes open to that sort of issue along the way, and try and come up with something that's either aligned with or can be adopted by other enterprises and certainly used in mixed farming. I know what you mean, Angus. We're certainly involved in plenty of mixed farming, and it's an important issue.
And I think, Adam, there's two very good contributions in the chat in regard to the ASBF and how they, and how they interact. And I think both of those help to answer those earlier questions. So I don't intend to repeat them, but they are great contributions. So thank you to those participants.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And hopefully Bruce and Tony, that sort of opened up that discussion a little bit, but certainly raise your hand and shout out if you feel like you need more or you got more questions. There's Anthony, you've got your hand up, but there's one in the chat here that came in first from Nick. It says, thanks, and this might be for you, Ange. Thanks, Cattle Australia, for this public consult and opportunity to ask questions. What has initial engagement been with SBTI to date, if any? Are they receptive to new natural forest definition localised to Australia, or have they given any guide rails for you to operate within?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So by part of the process, I suppose, is to seek all considerations for the great work that's already been done by many, many organisations within the supply chain. We considered launching to tender and consult on that, but first we're going to take a step back and seek those considerations of what the gaps are, what the risks are, the nuances, the information that's been considered before moving forward. There's a number of definitions that are coming out, and I see that's been noted in the chat. therefore, we're trying to line our ducks up first, and keeping an eye on the broader environment to go to. So taking in a lot of information at the moment.
Thanks, Ange. Hopefully that addresses that question, Nick. Anthony McMillan, you've got a question, and we might go to you, and then I'm conscious of time, and then also that some of the questions that have been asked might still yet be covered off. So Anthony, if you wouldn't mind asking your question, then we might kick on with you, Ange, to talk about next steps. Over to you, Anthony.
Yeah, hi Adam, it's not Anthony, it's Jane. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good, Jane.
Sorry, I'm on his link rather than my own. Just a note, there is an urgency in relation to this, and I do acknowledge your commitment to doing something about deforestation agenda that's been put to us. I'd also like to highlight that my knowledge is that all our major banks here in Australia have already done a deal, and so therefore the urgency is obviously a lot higher than just sitting around and talking about it. With encroachment and biosecurity as two of our major issues here in Australia and across the northern part of Australia, I think it's really important that legislation and policy across the whole top end of Australia is engaged in this. And it's, it's a massive amount of work to do in a very short space of time. And I believe May is going to be our deadline when we're all going to be negotiating with our banks.
Yeah, better late than never, Jane, and thanks for the question. We've certainly had a lot of discussion around how much work there is to do here, and then obviously that flows into how we resource that work. So it is front of mind. There's no doubt about that.
I think it's just worth pointing out just some of those questions coming through, and I just want to address, sorry, Adam, just very quickly around off the back of what Ange said about all the different standards that are coming our way and all the different range of things around deforestation. That's exactly why we're doing it. We're not going to be just accepting the stuff that's going to be imposed on us by others. We're actually about defining this and what it means in the Australian context and how that then can be used internationally. So we then end up in a reasonable position as an industry rather than having a whole range of different reporting requirements, a whole range of different standards applied to us. And so agree. Deforestation, European stuff we'll look at very, very closely, and there's no way you'll just be accepting it. And the same of these other standards that are floating around. So I just, I know there's been a bit of work, and a bit of words around the place about, you're just following down and going to be agreeing to this sort of stuff. No, the purpose of this is to get our definition that works in our environment.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks, Jane, for the comment on the question. I see, Carmel, you've got a question around timeframes for this work, so I reckon that's a good opportunity to move on to Ange and talk about next steps, and then, we might have a bit of time at the end there for a few more questions if they haven't been addressed. If you wouldn't mind, Ange.
Yes, thank you. So to date, you can see that in December, we made the Australian Beef Land Management and Biodiversity Commitment. We've moved into January with the advisory board being formed, and now this very important webinar with producers, and next is the scoping considerations. Scoping consideration document will be available on the website, and it will be sent out to everyone that was in the Rockhampton network. From there, those that have expressed interest. That, to give more flavour on what that scoping document includes, is very technical information on resources that have been used to date, that people have found, the definitions that have been sought after, through to what that means for the organisation that is filling it in. But it's not limited to those that have done an enormous amount of work in this space already. We want to hear from everyone, the questions, the queries, the risks that you would like to identify and put to us is really important. So we've got tight turnaround times on that, being the end of next week, so that we can consolidate that information and move to a tender process. Importantly with that is, going back to Adam's earlier question of me around data. Definition and data are going hand in hand, because you want, with integrity, credibility and accuracy, the information that people are using to make decisions on businesses in the supply chain. So that too is really important information that we're seeking in the consideration process. So we welcome all of that feedback. If you're unable to give that feedback in a written form and would prefer a discussion, then please reach out to Caitlin and myself and organise a meeting. We'd be more than happy to take on your considerations in that way. From that, we'll be ensuring that there's a risk register that includes all of these pieces. That will inform the advisory board and the Cattle Australia board on go, no-go decisions that may be required along the way. Tendering will be a formal process as well. That information will be shared in the coming weeks as it becomes available, and will be an important step in the process. But again, it too will be time-bound, as you've all discussed the urgency on this issue. Next slide, please, Morgan. So to do that, as I've just discussed, is you can use that QR code that's presented there. The information will again be on the website, so please fill in as much as possible if you can't fill it all in, but please, we really want to hear your feedback. Next slide, please. So on the website, it's not going to look like this, but these are all the ways that you can connect with the project. So through the biodiversity commitment one-pager, if you haven't read it yet, the advisory board and stakeholder engagement process, webinar details and communication updates that we'll send out broadly, and the scoping considerations. So thanks everyone for joining, and look forward to discussing this further with anyone that would like to.
Thank you, Ange. I might hand over to David Allen now. David, as I said, is the chair of our Sustainable Resilient Beef Systems Working Group. If I got that right, it's a bit of a mouthful and I always mess it up. But David, are you online? And if so, over to you.
I am, Adam, yes. Can you hear me okay?
Gotcha.
Yeah, thank you for that, and thanks for organising all this. So my name's David Allen. I'm a cattle producer from Southwest Victoria, and I'm on the Regional Consultative Committee. I'm one of the members of Cattle Australia RCC. And yeah, we don't want to understate the importance of this project. I think it's highly important for all beef producers and in fact industry generally in Australia, because it basically revolves around market access for farmers to get cattle into meatworks, and market access for cattle from Australia, or meat from Australia, and hides and other byproducts to get into Europe and other markets. So thank you very much for coming along today and listing your or registering your interest. So your participation today is certainly a big part of, or the start of a process, but it's great to have so many people on board. And there are a number of ways to stay involved or keep involved, and we're hoping that you all will, because as Anne said, it's the best way communication is to keep talking to everyone, keep the lines of communication open. So if you can stay up to date by registering on the Cattle Australia website, as Anne's just mentioned, and you can get updates there, and we can keep the conversation flowing. Register your commitment to the Australian Beef Land Management and Biodiversity commitment, and register your interest there. But one of the important things is the scoping considerations that Anne mentioned briefly. You know, it doesn't really matter whether you're from Northern Australia or Southern Australia. There will be things that will impact us along the way, and we all have questions and queries and all those types of issues that will be raised over the next few months, but more so the next couple of weeks. We'll need to be answered and are legitimate questions. So please provide any considerations you have to Cattle Australia website. And finally, sort of reach out to your regional consultative committee members. So as I mentioned, I'm one of two in Victoria. There are 15 of us around Australia. We cover the whole country. So the whole, every area of Australia is covered. And we represent the beef producers in our region. Over and above that, there are 7 state farming organisations as well that have representatives on our regional consultative committee. So don't forget your local state farming organisations as well. So yeah, try and track down your RCC committee member in your area and get his or her details. There are some fantastic members, committee members on this committee, and reach out to them and talk to them, and we'll try and do our best to keep the information up to you and keep the information flowing. I think that's about all, Adam.
Thank you very much, David, and I'm glad that you emphasise the importance of the Regional Consultative Committee and reaching out to them. We, as you said, this is a fairly newly installed committee, democratically elected from the 15 sub-regions right throughout Australia, and we are fairly excited, I suppose, about the potential of that group and the two-way flow of information from Cattle Australia, which is your organisation as producers, back to the sub-regions, and then from the sub-regions back into Cattle Australia. So please find out who is in your sub-region and connect with them. And if you need any help with that, reach out to us. We might just go back to that slide with the QR code, Morgan, if that's all right, in case anybody is interested in the scoping process and might have missed that. And look, we've done pretty well. We're actually a bit ahead of time. So we've probably got time for a few more questions if there are any out there. If anyone has anything they want to stick their hand up and ask, we'll wait for a bit for that. Otherwise, we might consider everybody is relatively happy and finish the webinar. And if there aren't any more questions, and Caitlin, I don't know whether I've missed anything in the Q&A or the chat, and you're just sending me a message to say there are more in the Q&A. Here we go. Jenny O'Sullivan, can the committee also consider what we report on and strive towards as an industry? Jenny, I don't know, is that a question or a comment, Jenny? Do you want to expand on that at all, or?
Yeah, hi everybody. It's just where you're looking at what deforestation is, and we're going to communicate the good things we're doing. But one of the things the ABS is trying to report on is the figures, and we were looking at where we're going to progress. So I feel that these are really important things you're dealing here, but there's still a bit missing about where as an industry should we be going and how can we improve and what are we going to do. If we're communicating to our stakeholders that sometimes are critical of us, where is the piece about what we're actually doing to improve, or where we're aiming to go? And I just feel that's a bit that's missing in this. And I think it's fantastic that a group's coming together. I think this issue around tree use and what we're doing here, there's a lot of misinformation. And so I think you'll be the prime committee that could perhaps set some recommendations about where we go with this. But I think this issue, one, it's yes, definition, but two is in Australia, what's happening? And as an industry, what do we want to be happening? And I think that bit's missing. Thanks.
Thank you, Jenny. I could not agree more. And certainly that's why we worked together very closely with, the likes of the ABSF, and stay out of the negative. There was a lot of discussion at the roundtable around, do we even want to use the term deforestation? Well, we decided that we did, because that's what we're dealing with here, and that's what, certainly investment pressures, that's how we talk about it. But the holy grail of all of this is to, as you say, work progressively towards better land management outcomes for all stakeholders. And you are nodding vigorously. You might have something to add.
And I really think that's at the crux of it, right? Until we've been able to answer the question on deforestation, which is being informed internationally to us. We don't want to be defined by trees, because defining by trees doesn't actually measure the health of any forest. Good land management practices do, and equate to good biodiversity, water quality, and all those other things that we've talked about at the ABSF over the last 2 years. This is a first step, I guess, Jenny, in being able to put this to bed, while also really, leaning towards good land management practices are happening now and will continue to happen, and that being defined by trees is really not helpful in our environment right now.
Thanks, Ange. Ange, while I got you, a really quick question here from Cassie O'Brien is, what's the cut-off date for the scoping process?
The end of next week.
End of next week. Thank you. Ross has a question, then I'll kick over to Jacob and Angus, who've got their hands up. Ross says, how optimistic is CA that government will accept a new definition that will clearly be in favour of producers, given the public disagreement that exists between producers and policymakers? Who wants to take that one?
So for me, Adam, I look at these things very simply. And this work is about providing us with the tools to be able to go and talk to policymakers about what the future looks like. And clearly, if we don't have an understanding of what our world looks like in our environment, we really won't be in a position to be able to talk to government about those. So am I optimistic? I'm optimistic that if we go well equipped with a well thought out, a well understood, a well argued position, that government will listen. But at the moment, we don't have that. And we're not even in a position where we can go to the table and talk intelligently on a range of these issues, other than saying, well, that one's not for us. Okay, the next question is which one is for you? And so this is about creating the one that is for us. So Ross, it's a great question. It really is, because for me, and I may be a little more political than some of our other people on the board, etc. This is what it's about. Give us the tools, and then we can go and talk and advocate on behalf of industry.
Thank you, Chris. Jacob Beatros, you got your hand up. G'day, Jacob.
Hey, Adam. Thanks, mate. Probably might not be able to answer today, but just curious to see if the advisory board or committee has a way of addressing. I see a lot of people get caught on, as we do, definitions, but they see in the FAO the very top line definition of excludes agricultural land, and people get very excited when they see that. If you actually read the exemption, it doesn't actually refer to grazing land at all. It refers to where the tree is the actual agricultural product. Is there a way that can be, I guess, part of the communication plan and all this for, I guess, to iron that out a bit more for producers, or even just anyone who misunderstands that a bit?
Yeah, that's still a very big question mark kicking around this conversation, isn't it? Ange, do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. I think that's really, the devil's in all the detail, right? So with woody forest being, defined in 12 months' time after implementation of the EUDR, like, there is just so much detail, and at the highest level with FOA, agree that we can communicate what those pieces look like. I also refer to the government's national acceptance of that they put together, and all state and territories aligned, and many other stakeholders, is the Australian Land Use Management. I was going to say commitment because it's on my mind, classification, and using those broad tools to inform such work is one of the bases that we can work from, so that we're not starting from scratch on everything. So where things could be tweaked to support that national recognition, then we'll be trying to use those. We simply don't have time to reinvent the wheel either.
Yeah, I agree with that. Sometimes we need to be careful about seeing things like, oh, that looks really good, when it actually goes against what we're trying to achieve. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jacob. Thanks, Ange. I'll go to you in a minute again, Angus. There's just a couple of comments here. So Phil Tickle, thanks, Phil, from SIBO. For those wondering what areas in Australia might be impacted by initiatives such as the, Caitlin, you just took it away from me, such as the EU deforestation regs. Phil has put a map in the chat showing the area of Australia according to the FAO definition. Thank you, Phil. So that's in the chat for those that are interested. And then Deborah Willis, read misinformation. We have to make sure we get the science right, reliable sources to be able to back our definition. And I think we could not agree more, Deborah. Thank you. Angus, over to you. And then maybe we've got time for one or two more and we might wrap things up.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Look, I suppose from where I sit, I think congratulations on you guys for taking this prickly issue on. You know, like it's a thing. But I suppose there's a couple of points I'd really like to make sure is that to get the support from producers, we'd be really great for you to be able to present examples of what is happening at the moment to demonstrate why we're doing this, because a lot of people are just saying, well, you buggers are making this up. It doesn't need to be, you're just trying to give yourself a job and, bloody blah, blah. But just a clear example of almost a one-liner to say, this is what's happening and this is why we need to change it is really, really important. And also getting through to the people that don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. Like, you could frig around with this and never get an answer. What we need to come up with is a realistic answer that is accountable, scientific and valid, but not try to make it, that sort of stuff. So they're the main points I'd just like to reiterate, just getting that comms right with all our producers to say, this is why we're doing this stuff. This is what's happening to you now, and this is why we want to do it. So just making sure that's really stuff and just keeping that comms up. Again, I suppose, particularly with state farming organisations, make sure they're telling their members why you guys are doing this, because it's a value proposition. We've got to understand why you're doing it. And the only other point, a bit of a negative here, is don't build up people's building up people's expectations is tricky business. It's really good to be positive, but having that realistic expectation is really important as well. But like I say, yeah, look forward to working with you guys and let's get this done. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Angus. Love your passion, and so communication is key and progress over perfection. I couldn't agree more. So thank you for that comment. I can't see any more raised hands or questions in the Q&A. So unless anybody's got anything burning, we probably have time for one more. Otherwise, I might, Chris, I might just see. Do you want to wrap up with any sort of final comments, Chris, or are you happy to close this out?
Look, I'm all I wanted to say is, and thank you to Angus, and I think it's really just stimulated me to put a couple of, as part of our comms around this, to put a couple of case studies up on the website. And I think that's a really good suggestion as far as engaging further with producers and giving the tools that we need. And a reminder about state farming organisations, who I remind folk are a member of Cattle Australia. And I think that they're both really important points as far as the comms goes, because we don't want to lose people early. And like you, Angus, I've already had people making comments about, you're just a bunch of greenies, you're just chasing this. And that's not the case, as I'm sure most people on this call understand. And so fantastic session, fantastic to get people engaged, Adam, and thank you for chairing, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to everybody who's provided input today. Thanks for everyone for taking the time to jump on. I think, the open and honest format and the context with which we've discussed things today is exactly how we want this to continue. So appreciate all your input. Hope the producers out there are getting enough rain and not too much. I know some of you probably are, but there's money in mud and not dust, I guess. So I hope everyone's doing well, and thank you for your time today, and we'll talk again soon, and please reach out to any of us at CA if you have any questions or concerns. Thank you very much.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks, Adam.
Thanks, Adam.